Yes, hello and welcome to Fraud Fact Friday. Today, episode 15, June 19th, and we are going to be talking AI in financial services. And for this topic, I have Dan with me here today from Emerge. And hi, Dan. Thanks for taking the time to join.
Glad to be here with you, David. It's my first time on LinkedIn Live, so happy to be hopping on board.
All right. So you are the CEO of and head of research at Emerge, artificial intelligence research company, with a tagline of mapping what's possible and what's working in artificial intelligence, helping leaders develop winning AI strategies.
Okay.
And your LinkedIn tagline follows up with that very nicely, helping you make a stronger business case for AI, best practices, use cases, cutting edge insights for measurable AI ROI.
Okay.
So we're going to look into that today with relation to fraud fighting. Also, maybe from the other side of things, some schemes to keep an eye out for. It'll be a pretty, general discussion, but we'll get into some details on some specific topics as well. And I know we have a hard end today at 12:30, so we are going to stick to our schedule today, and I am going to start off with the icebreaker, the Fraud Fact Friday Fast Facts, which means you have to answer 5 either/or questions in 30 seconds.
All right, let's do it.
If you're up to the challenge,
Yep.
all right.
What do we got?
So let me get my fancy timer out here so you can follow along. Burger or pizza?
Pizza.
Physical copy of a book or an ebook?
I hate to say it, man. I still cut down trees. If it matters, I'm cutting a tree down. You know, it just is what it is.
All right. So tomorrow's first day of summer. Are you a summer or winter person?
Summer.
And during a road trip, are you listening to podcast or music?
Podcast.
And for customer support, chatbot or human?
Human. For right now, anyway. For right now.
All right. That was a fun little question at the end. Has a little bit to do with our topic. Didn't want to put you on the spot there, but I also prefer, at least at the moment, the human interaction. But we'll see how chatbots come along.
We need a little bit of time. We need a little bit of time to improve that tech. It's its own conversation, but anyway.
For sure. So anybody watching, thank you for joining. Let us know where you're viewing from. And I also encourage you to ask any questions you have as we go along here. But for now, I am going to where are you streaming from?
Boston.
Boston. Okay. So also East Coast. So it is actually 10 a.m. there. I am going to give you the chance to introduce yourself, tell the audience a little bit about your background and what you're currently doing at Emerge.
Yeah, sure. So again, name's Dan Faggella. Emerge Artificial Intelligence Research is the company. You can think about us like a boutique Forrester or a Gartner, but with a really narrow focus, which is the return on investment of AI. So most of our work is in financial services, but we do some work in other spaces. So essentially helping people map the vendor ecosystem, determine high ROI AI projects, and find the right vendor partners. That's sort of our work. So research and advisory. A lot of that's with the big banks in the US, Australia, but we also do a lot of presenting and work with organizations like the World Bank, the United Nations, et cetera. So a lot of speaking engagements in the intergovernmental world, which is quite interested in AI too, but most of our corporate clients are finance. So that's my day-to-day.
Okay. Welcome a couple of guests here. Leah Suraksha, I hope I pronounced it correctly, viewing from India. Leah in Tulsa, and Stanley in the Netherlands. So international audience so far. And again, anybody who has any questions, feel free to jump in. I would like to start, if it's okay with you, and talk a little bit about your own podcasting efforts. You have a couple, I believe, that, however, are still razor focused on AI, and one of them is AI in financial services.
Yep.
So firstly, just along those lines, can you give me your definition of artificial intelligence?
Yeah. I like, we have an article about this at emerge.com, but I like the really broad definition of sort of, generally speaking, a machine doing that which we would presume would require human intelligence. I still like that definition.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of those kinds of applications that might not be ML specifically, right? Might be older school approaches to artificial intelligence. I think that in the future we'll even see more hybrid models. But yeah, I like an open-ended definition like that. So that's kind of how I refer to AI.
Okay. All right. And the podcast, what is the scope, the purpose? I mean, I got to know you from you were interviewing someone that I had worked with in the past, Jan Faggella, on the topic of compliance. So I said, oh, this looks like an interesting company talking about AI and compliance, AI and fraud. So what exactly is the scope? What are you covering there?
Yeah. We have two podcasts. So one is called AI in Business. Anybody who's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or SoundCloud or whatever can look it up, or AI in Financial Services. For both of them, we sort of focus on two general themes. One is individual use cases. So we go deep at an executive level and non-technical level, kind of conceptually. What is AI doing? So what's the business problem or opportunity? How is it operating today? And where does AI fit in? AI is very rarely transforming every single element of a process. It's coming in at specific points. So where does that juncture occur? What kind of data is used, and what's required to deliver value, and what's that darn output? And what's the value of that potentially to business? So breaking that down in conceptual terms is really helpful in helping people find opportunities in their own business to say, whoa, I've got a juncture like that in our own sales process, or I've got a juncture like that in our own fraud process. So use cases is one that we really like to double down on. And the second is more around AI deployment and return on investment. So practical advice around what does it take to make a project work? What do we need to do to bring teams together? What do we need to do to open up our data infrastructure? What do we need to do to get executive buy-in to make sure this project gets to deployment and delivers some damn value? So use cases and adoption is really the core focus of those two shows.
Okay. And I'm assuming these interviews have also been very insightful for you. You're interviewing lots of people with lots of industry expertise. And so what would you say would be your top, let's say, two or three takeaways so far? How many episodes do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for 8 years. So it's probably more than 3 takeaways. But
I bet.
if I think about, so we interview a lot of smart folks. So when we go into a large retail bank, let's say, they like to know that, like my call after you today is the head of AI at US Bank, for example. So this is sort of a day in the life. A day in the life is leadership at large multi-billion-dollar companies and what they're doing with AI. So as it turns out, David, I don't know if you may be aware of this. It's actually somewhat hard to learn what's working and what's not in big companies. It's actually hard to learn what they tried and flopped and what they tried and worked. And so grinding out those insights is super, super valuable for us and is really a lot of the crux of the value that we bring to other companies as well. But yeah, in terms of big takeaways, I'll give you takeaway categories because, man, there's so much we could potentially go into. One of which is learning a lot about how critical executive buy-in is for AI projects. So learning that the wrong expectations at the beginning of a project or even around what project to pick is often the origin of every other problem that we see. So for us, executive AI fluency is huge. When we work with firms, we try to get leadership up to snuff because they're often so busy. They think AI is IT. Yeah, go plug it in. And the expectations around what it's going to take to bring this thing to life sinks 90% of these ships. Gartner says 85. If we look outside of e-commerce and media, I think we're looking at a much bigger number than that of pilot projects and a lot of its expectations. So that's one big takeaway. Let me see if I can come up with another really big, broad one. And another one is around the new ways that teams have to work. So when we need to bring an AI project together, just how much collaboration has to happen between data scientists, vendors, and internal subject matter experts, not just occasional meetings, but often taking full-time people from customer service and saying, your job is not answering the phone anymore. It's working hand in hand with this data science team to bake in that knowledge, to validate what they think they should be training for features, et cetera. So teams and executive knowledge have been kind of a big resonant theme across industry categories, oil and gas, banking, et cetera. These drums keep getting beaten on the podcast, and it's taught us some interesting lessons. So those are two of them.
Yeah. So where would you say, now looking specifically at banking, where do you see the most potential? Are there for AI now applications? Are there any quick wins to be had, or is that go along the lines of, hey, that's IT, plug it in.
Yeah.
There are no quick wins.
I always feel tentative about saying the term quick wins. The things that can be done quickly are little sandbox projects that we feel good when we do a press release about, but never turn into deployments. So the most popular thing in this category in banking would be chatbots. Now that this hype has started to die off. You know, the Wells Fargos and the Ally Banks of the world, they don't even offer it anymore, right? It was almost just there as a marketing poof when everybody else was doing one. And many of the smaller vendors have died off. But in terms of sort of, you know, turn it on now and get immediate benefit, I'm very tentative about anything like that. But I will tell you where the most accessible near-term measurable return on investment likely is. So just to give you an idea, our AI and banking landscape is an analysis of some 110 companies in the retail and commercial banking space, AI firms, and 50 to 60 use cases of global top 50 banks. Where are they adding AI, leveraging AI, investing in AI, et cetera? So very big market landscape perspective. And I can tell you right now, the bulk of the money and the bulk of the companies and applications are in risk-related functions. So fraud, you and I are talking about fraud today. I think that's part of the reason this conversation is happening. Fraud is great. Anti-money laundering is great. Cybersecurity often fits the bill in a very big way as well. And those categories alone are something to the tune of half of the dollars that we estimate big banks are spending. So to answer your question briefly, where's the value? Anomaly detection for fraud, money laundering, cybersec, I would say would be as close to low-hanging fruit. Still going to take a while to deploy these things, change these systems, but as close to low-hanging fruit that's immediately measurable as we can find. There's bigger transformation in the next 5 years. It's its own conversation, but near term, that's your answer.
And you mentioned cybersecurity, so I saw Matt jump on. Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining. One of the experts I interviewed on the topic of cybersecurity in a previous episode. Thanks for joining and commenting. So you just mentioned fraud. It's obviously a big part of our topic today. So why do you think the fraud fighting community should be excited about AI?
Yeah. So when we think about when we map the landscape for a client firm, we think about what's possible and what's working. Like you said in the motto, right? What's possible is all possible use cases. Where can it make a difference? What's working is a different topic altogether. Of those possibles, which are currently delivering dollars, making or saving money or reducing risk in a tangible way, or have an inevitable shot at really changing the way business is done. In other words, the trend is not going away. So, I cannot tell you with any confidence that wealth managers are going to use AI to suggest content to their, investment clients, like send them updates about Disney with AI or something. I absolutely cannot tell you that that's inevitably going to be a big game changer for the next 5 years in wealth management. For fraud, I can absolutely tell you it is. And for cybersec, I can absolutely tell you. And the main premise is the following. The main premise is that within the fraud world, there's only so many things we can hard code. And we're also working in what is referred to as an adversarial system. So it might be possible that if we're optimizing some physical process in oil and gas or some broad set of general user behaviors in e-commerce, things may be static enough in those domains where once we calibrate it, a set of rules, we can kind of just control for that universe. But in fraud, we have people who are very smart, leveraging tremendous technology to really violate our systems as violently as they can, and to profit in doing so. And so that's a different circumstance. Very few people at Amazon are buying things in rapidly weird patterns just to confuse Amazon, right? Like almost nobody is doing that. But in the fraud world, we're working with adversaries. So machine learning has the ability to match patterns of those new, funky, different approaches to fraud and pick up on those before we can write rules about them. And it can also, David, determine variance from the normal patterns. So if we know what non-fraud transactions look like, we may be able to see variance. Even if there's no rule that says flag it, we can still say that's different than usual and it warrants more investigation than, let's say, a par for the course instance might warrant. So variance from normal and matching patterns of fraud allows us to kind of evolve and grow with these adversaries instead of getting left behind. And so fraud is going to be a part of the future. It is a question of when and not if.
So are we talking then larger institutions on this, or is this something that also would be something for the smaller financial institutions as well?
Yeah, for the time being, David, the bulk of this is going to be larger firms. We are rarely doing anything with firms under $1 billion in revenue. Occasionally, but rarely. Really fast-moving spaces like fintech don't fit the same rules, but in established enterprises, that's kind of the par for the course. Reason being, David, these technologies are still somewhat nascent in terms of how they can integrate and make their way into companies, and they require some degree of in-house talent to understand how to hook in, how to train, how to work with our own data and integrate it into these vendor solutions, et cetera, et cetera. So the way this will become accessible to smaller firms is when the vendor ecosystem develops to such a degree that it is just like software. In other words, right now, AI is not like software. It is not like IT. It is like science. What do I mean? What I mean is that we have to, as a company, we have to look at our own data. We have to get our hands dirty working with it. We have to make estimates around what features to test. We need experts in the room. They've got to come together about this stuff. We've got to train these systems, see the output, calibrate it, figure out if we can get value. That doesn't sound like a Salesforce integration to me. Not at all. So that's the state of affairs now. When these vendor systems are trained adequately to the point whereby that anomaly flagging can happen with very minimal user, no in-house Carnegie Mellon AI experts, right? Just in-house regular IT folks. When those regular in-house IT folks have a user interface that flags those anomalies or those matches to fraud because the vendor already has figured out a way to sort of just display that, then we'll see this stuff make its way down. But right now, that is not the state of affairs. And I suspect it might be another 3 to 4 years before we see very much of that at all in the banking world.
Okay. So a question came in. It's actually a question that I had on my list, so I might pull it forward a bit. Very interesting, because you had mentioned the misuse or the by criminals to attack the system. So we had a question come in from Matt. That which can be used for good can be used for evil. How do you see fraudsters using AI? And this is something I wanted to get a little bit into anyway. So maybe we can pull that forward.
Yeah, sure. So a couple things here. Number one, there's a little bit less transparency into that market than there is into the fighting market, right?
Sure, yeah. You'll be researching in different areas.
I'm able to get on the phone with, former head of AI at HSBC, C-level people at Citibank. I'm usually not able to get on the phone with just like really rough financial criminals. I haven't done a very, maybe I could start a different podcast. So that's a good idea. But what I will say is this. So what I can suspect, and from kind of the rustles in the breeze, so to speak, is that fraudsters online, already there's a pretty big market for building what appear to be viable identities. So whether that's taking like somebody's social security number or like old credit card numbers or whatever amalgam of human parts, whatever Frankenstein of human parts can be found or can be used or can be programmatically generated, and maybe can even make purchases and develop a bit of history to build some kind of trust across the network to appear real. There's a market in doing that and building those identities up. Yeah. And I suspect that finding those, whether it be credit card info, deep personal information, obituaries, or whatever the case may be, whatever sources we need to pull from to start building those Frankenstein people that we're going to pretend are normal until we want to pull the trigger and rip and steal some stuff. The finding, the construction of those identities, I don't think is going to be automated by AI. But finding where those parts are out in the digital ecosystem is something that is more than within the realm of artificial intelligence. So that's one. A second might be modeling the actual kind of behavior that we think a person would do. So in terms of, if we have a whole bunch of these kind of bot entities, I don't know, making purchases, or buying or selling, or whatever the case may be, there's probably some way to like automate it where it all happens at 7:30 in the morning or something, where it's pretty self-evident that there's some big confluence of digital people doing something, as opposed to being able to sort of generate what would be normal activity, what's normal mouse movement on this site when we're submitting our form, what's a normal cadence of how long it would take to complete this process, so it's clear we're not a robot. Some degree of AI may be leverageable there, but I think a lot of it maybe in fraud is going to be around kind of finding those initial data bits that let us put together a nice fraudulent identity in the first place. I suspect that those two would be areas where we'll see this stuff used, but I should get more fraudsters on the podcast, to be honest.
Yeah, they're out there, some reformed ones. So they're out there and
oh, nice.
willing to help.
Ones. Yeah, I got to find the ones that have gone white hat. That's right.
Yeah, for sure. Another question came in. I'm going to blend it in. We can see, would AI impact false alerts in higher amounts? What's your take?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about is false positives and false negatives. So the goal is a reduction in false positives and false negatives. That's the objective of these systems. However, it's impossible to say that it'll necessarily deliver that. So the objective here is a reduction. So when we talk about how do we measure a fraud system in terms of whether it's helping us or not as a business, one of the measures among many is relative percent of false positives and false negatives. If we have a lot more false positives, well, this thing is just eating up more time. Why are we using it? The idea is that it should be filtering these instances and kind of rating and ranking them so that the ones we end up checking are actually the ones that are more likely to deserve the check in the first place. But the question is, will it reduce or decrease it? The answer is we've really got to deploy the thing and figure it out. It might be the case that our data volumes aren't high enough, or that the features that we're actually tracking or we're pulling into our system just aren't harmonized enough to even use them well, and we're not able to get good enough clear signals, or it doesn't track well enough to the other kinds of cases the vendors worked with. So it's going to be an experiment, but if it goes well, the answer is rather clear. Part of the big value prop here is less false positives, less false negatives.
Yeah, and investigating then the right cases. And okay, so thank you for those questions from the audience. We have about, I would say, 8 minutes before we have our hard cut. I wanted to get into, because it wasn't the first time that I've heard something about this. My first guest this year, in fact, mentioned deepfakes as something that's growing. It's going to be a growing problem for fraud fighters. So what is a deepfake? And what's the technology behind it? What should we be concerned about there?
Yeah, so this is a topic I've been focused on for a long, long time. So I'm passionate about this in a big way. Interpol had us give a talk about this, I think it was like 2.5 years ago. And last year, around this time of year at UN headquarters, we did, I think, the first ever presentation in the UN on deepfakes, where we took a director of the crime and justice wing of the UN, and we made her say a bunch of things she never said and put it up on the screen in front of everybody. Yeah, got everybody really spooked out.
Visual learning, yeah.
Yeah. It's better than like, here's what the technology is in a diagram, right? It's better to be like, here's someone in the room saying a bunch of things they never said. Yeah, it's a much more compelling case. That's actually, I think that's up on Emerge. Beyond Deepfakes, EMERJ, Emerge is the name of the website. I think it's probably the video's up there. But anyway, so I love this topic. The broader bucket that this fits into. So a deepfake right now refers to a programmatically generated version of a person, normally a face and a voice, doing and or saying something that they haven't actually done or said. So training an algorithm. There's some great examples of this of Barack Obama, where they put his face over somebody else, and then that person was sort of saying various and sundry things. So deepfakes can be done by appending the digitally rendered face of the person in question to someone else who's actually doing the talking and gesturing. It can also be done by just programmatically generating all the facial expressions of that person. That requires a lot more initial footage that we need to take in. So this is often best done by people who have a lot of footage about them. Obama obviously being a pretty prime candidate for that, being the president of the United States.
A lot out there, yeah.
So plenty of videos to train on that fella. If you want to make a deep fake, he's a good target there. But that's what a deep fake is. And to some degree, They are distinguishable from video. There's still kind of errors and edits and ways that we can see, and sometimes these things really do need to be touched up after the fact to make sure the audio isn't, you know, messed up, and there's a lot of tweaking. It's not an instantaneous, undetectable, you know, solution. It still revolves some tweaking. But if we look at the progress over just the last 2.5 years since it got on our radar, big steps, big steps. The broader bucket that this falls under, David, is just programmatically generated content writ large. If we can generate tweets from fake accounts, if we can generate photos of maybe something happening down a street, like a riot or a fire or something that doesn't actually occur, whatever the case may be, the broader bucket that this falls under is programmatically generated content writ large, audio, video, images. The reason this is sort of bothersome, in our opinion, right now, I think the technology is not quite there. Often we can do better things with CGI, or we can do better things with Photoshop if we're making an image. And sort of, you know, for subterfuge, it may not be the top tool in the tool belt, but it's getting so much better to the point where in 3 to 4 years, a reasonably smart college student with, you know, a couple iPhone videos of a teacher could probably make some pretty disturbing things of that person. And the broad dynamic, you said, sort of why should we be bothered by it, is that for something like 5 or 6 generations, pictures and audio and video have been artifacts of events that actually occurred. And over the course of the next 10 years, it will be rather clear that that is no longer the case. And so the disruptive little nips of where that's going to really not be digestible very well, where that's really not going to fit well with society and business and how we do things, are grandiose. There's a lot of places where that could be pretty bothersome.
Okay. One final question, because we're running out of time, but you talked a lot about, or not a lot, but you mentioned technology adoption, or you write a lot about it, at least, in a lot of your work. So whether it's the insurance industry, banking industry, whatever industry, you mentioned buy-in from the top as an example. What would you say if you had to sum it up? There's a lot of talk about AI. Everyone talks about it. Few are doing it. It's still the case, at least from what I've been researching as well. So what does it take for true adoption? How would you sum it up?
Yeah, well, there's 3 main elements. We actually have a visual infographic of this. If people Google emerge, it's EMERJ, critical capabilities. If you want a simple infographic, there's 3 categories and about 3 subcategories under each of those of how this breaks down. But it's skills, it's culture, it's resources. I'll be very fast here. Skills is 2 things. It's our technical talent, like who's actually writing the code? Do we have the in-house talent? And it's our subject matter experts, our business leaders, et cetera, understanding functionally how AI works. They need a conceptual grasp. They can't just think it's IT. It can't be magic. So we need both of those. Culture. We need to be able to iterate and experiment and have that not be a bad thing. We need to know that this is a bit of an R&D project and not have everybody, you know, flip out over it. And we also need a culture that respects data, where we harmonize this stuff, we store this stuff properly, we store it with the supposition that it has value, and that happens across the company. The last one is resources. Resources is our actual data itself, getting our data infrastructure more accessible and more available for folks who are actually going to need it, and also having in-house playbooks, resources where we know how to run AI projects. So skills, culture, resources. We've broken this out in that critical capabilities article. I definitely recommend people check it out. But those things right there are more important by a astronomical margin than any individual AI use case. And the problem is the opposite is still what much of the C-suite believes. And this is one of the many reasons why we see a lot of failed pilots. And we're trying to change that dialogue because it's got to shift for this stuff to be adopted. So hopefully that's a helpful answer.
Very helpful. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for taking the time to spread the knowledge. And we'll share some of your resources afterwards that you mentioned here.
Yeah.
On LinkedIn and for sure. And so thank you. I hope you have a great weekend, successful rest of the day. And I'm sure we'll be in touch.
You bet. Hey, good to be here, David. And for everybody tuned in, great to meet you as well. You can find us emerj.com. David, I'll catch you soon.
Perfect. Thank you.